Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Riddell. I'm a professor at Bishop's University, and I'm also the Stephen A. Jaroslawski Chair of Undergraduate Teaching Excellence.
And I'm Lisa Dixon from the University of Northern British Columbia, and I'm a 3M National Teaching Fellow and project leader for the 3M National Teaching Fellowship Mentoring Network.
So Dr. Dixon is one of our Jaroslawski visiting scholars at Bishop's, and she is here doing a number of different things. But today we'd like to talk about the development of teaching dossiers. And I think we have three burning questions that we want to explore today in our conversation. And the first one is really curious about how you came to teaching dossiers, how you developed them, what your experience was writing them.
Well, I was prompted to write a teaching dossier for the first time when I was nominated for the 3M National Teaching Fellowship, which gave me an opportunity to actually carve some time out of the busy life of burgeoning academic to actually think about my teaching and to delve deeper into my underlying values and philosophies, and to think about how those influence how I behave and what I do in the classroom and with my students. It was arduous and incredibly wonderful in the end, but it took me a very long time. I think I worked on it full time for about 4 months. A lot of that time spent sort of sitting and staring into the middle distance and asking myself, who am I anyway? And I hadn't really had any time or opportunity to really think about those questions until I came to that. Once I became a 3M National Teaching Fellow, I started working with other nominees, and that gave me an opportunity to learn how other people come to it and to think about how my experience might help them move through that process, because it can be a little bit intimidating to sit down and really start to think about what your values are and how that actually plays out in your work. So it does give you a structure that you can follow, although it's quite open in terms of what a dossier is going to look like. It's always your dossier, so there's no template for it, but it did create a kind of bounded space where you could sort of start to fill things into boxes, and it asks particular kinds of questions to get you thinking about what it means. I also sat on the adjudication committee, and I've done some mentorship for the 3M National Student Fellowship, which is sort of smaller in scope, but also asks very similar questions. And so helping students work through that process of reflection was really helpful and valuable in my understanding on how dossiers, just in general, shaping narratives about sort of how you live what you believe, can work, and the value of why we're even doing them. So I had the 3M Fellowship was sort of the gateway to a larger engagement with the question of what it means to write the narrative of your commitments. So what about you?
Oh, well, I think like most of us, I didn't really understand what a teaching dossier was when I was a junior faculty member. I knew that I wanted to get a job. So in my job package, I put together a teaching philosophy and cobbled together some syllabi and a couple of assignments and assessment strategies. I didn't even have the language for that. I put together something that was relatively formulaic. I used some what I now see as pretty basic platitudes and very general statements like teaching and research are mutually beneficial and cross-fertilizing, which I believe fundamentally, but it didn't speak to me and my guiding vision and my sort of core values. So I put together a teaching dossier and I submitted it, and I got a job and put a version of that towards my tenure package. And it wasn't until I got the opportunity to write my 3M dossier that I was really challenged by a number of mentors and a number of readers and advisors to say, what is at the core of what you believe? What are your key values? How do you have a vision, and then how do you anchor it in practice and assess it and measure it and find different ways of telling that story? And so, I took 4 months as well over the course of a summer at the beginning of my sabbatical, And it was life-changing for me. It was the hardest thing I've ever written. It shook me to the core. It was 10, 12, 15 drafts. It was meeting with my nominator who kept saying, okay, but go further. Try harder. Answer this question. It's not entirely clear to me why this is the essence of you. And I found it frustrating and exhilarating. And I also, when I started to read some of the letters that were coming in from colleagues and former students and people I'd worked with in the community, I was just so humbled. I was so shocked. I was so I cried a lot. And it made me want to be better and to do better and to think carefully and critically about my practice.
Yeah. And mentorship, I think, is really important in that, having somebody who will push you when you think you're done. The same thing that we do with our students, right? This is great, but you can do more.
Right.
And that was what I heard over and over again when I did my dossier, and I'd give my mentor, the dossier, and he would read it, and he'd say, yep, this is very competent, but it's not you.
Right.
And that was very difficult to find out how to sound like myself and to really excavate what I think I'm doing as an educator.
And I love that verb because it is excavating. It's going through rock into a kind of vein of meaning that runs at the base of that mountain, right? And everything you do. And one of the things that I was so surprised about when I wrote my dossier was I had been doing things that I thought maybe were a bit ad hoc. They were a bit scattered. They were a bit circuitous in my journey. And what I realized when I wrote it and created a narrative around it is that it all fit. It all was aligned, and it was all within a vision that I hadn't articulated to myself, but had been sort of mucking about figuring it out as I went. So that was reassuring too, right? That really difficult alignment between vision and practice and looking backwards retrospectively and seeing that all of these things were connected and sort of building the threads of a fabric that was meaningful and that was grounded in a vision and values.
Yeah, exactly. So why do a dossier? What's the purpose or the value? What's the value of doing a dossier? Because it can take a lot of time, as we've just said, 4 months in this case. And also, if you're really using your dossier as a reflective tool to help you think about, sort of process your experience and help you to design the future of your teaching, you're going to be returning to that dossier either formally or informally for a long time. So it is a huge investment of time and effort. So what do you think is the value? So you might say you get to be in the 3M Fellowship, so you get an award or you get a reward for that time spent. But what do you think is the larger sense of value there?
So I think for me and for a number of people who I've worked with and worked through their dossiers and their stories is that clarity of purpose. It is the critical self-reflection. It is the alignment of the vision and practice. It is, once you see it, right? Once it becomes visible, you can't unsee it. You can't make it, doesn't go back to being invisible. Once you start to see those threads, you start to design everything from courses to assignments to experiential learning to extracurriculars to research to all of those things animate the experience. And so for me, there was a kind of clarity of vision. There was now a living document that if I feel that I'm tired or worn down or discouraged, I actually go back and read the dossier. And I go back and think, okay, this is my touchstone. This is, do I still believe in this too, right? It has to be a living document so that you're constantly, if you're growing as a scholar, as a researcher, as a thinker, as a learner, your philosophy should also be shifting with you and transforming. So for me, the most valuable is that critical self-reflection, is that clarity, is the narrativization of your work, right? To be able to see it and to give it shape and to give it a kind of beginning, middle, and end, that it is both a guide and also an object of beauty and thoughtfulness and messiness. It can be messy. It should be messy.
Yeah.
But that for me is the real value. And then the second question is, how do you then use it, right? How do you deploy it? And that's when you think about promotion, evaluation, and review. You think about institutional teaching awards. You can think about 3Ms. But the core value is that critical self-reflection, and then how you send that into the world will have different kinds of purposes. Yeah. What about you? What's the value?
Well, everything that you said, for sure. All of those things. Do that. But also, in addition to that, I think of the Teaching Dossier as a work of critical scholarship as well. It's a kind of action research, I think. It's grounded in literature and going out and finding the voices and those scholarly mentors and that evidence-based research and those kinds of things that you can bring in. So that was sort of my first entry into the scholarship of teaching and learning too, because I needed help with the vocabulary and things that could give some shape to sort of what I was feeling and what I was doing. And so that was very helpful. But it itself is a work of scholarship as well. It has a kind of rigor to it. It's not just humming to yourself about how great you are,
No.
although it can be nice to hum to yourself about how great you are sometimes, particularly when, on bad days. But it does have a kind of rigor to it that I found really valuable because it also carved out a space for that kind of work, because we have very packed lives and lots of demands placed on us that often sort of pull us in all kinds of directions. And we don't often make the kind of space that we need to do that kind of reflection that is so rich and that helps us to become better and better at what we do. So the 3M nomination, so I wrote mine in response to something, so it wasn't something that I did spontaneously, but it did kind of legitimize that kind of work. So creating that having that artifact at the end of it was really important to helping me to legitimize to myself what my teaching is worth and what its value is in the larger context too. So in addition to those sort of personal enrichments, in addition to the way that it has helped me to shape my practice going forward, as you say, you kind of can't unthink of it once you start working in that way. There's also this larger sense of a contribution to scholarly thinking about teaching and the culture of teaching and learning at the university as well, right? We were just saying that when we started out, like, there weren't really workshops on teaching dossiers and those kinds of things. We sort of had to go out and find our mentors and kind of build that for ourselves. But we can see that culture is shifting and changing. And being able to get into a room with people and talk about teaching dossiers helps to reveal the importance and value of teaching in itself relative to the more traditionally valued things like research or service. So it helps to make us and our labor visible to all kinds of different audiences as well, which is really important.
Right, that teaching dossier has a component of inward critical self-reflection and rigor, but it also has an advocacy piece externally facing, right? And carves out these spaces to say this is a scholarly practice, this is intentional, this is important, and it deserves to take up space.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
So if you were to give a couple of pieces of advice, and I already hear you giving advice, it's not a laudatory narrative, right? It is not humming your own self-worth, right? It is messy, it is thoughtful, it is rigorous, it is often over contested conceptual terrains. What other advice would you give to somebody developing their teaching dossier?
I would say give yourself time to really think. I would say, this is my new thing, ask yourself what you love about what you do and start there. think about what it is that makes it worthwhile for you to get into that space every day, or every 3 days, or however much you're teaching or thinking about teaching, which is pretty much all the time. And start from there. I think that can be really helpful. But give yourself the time to really, really work on those underlying values and beliefs. And that is going to make your dossier authentic. It's going to help you find your voice. It's going to help you make choices as you move through your teaching practice, right? So if you have a strong sense of what you're willing to fight for, what you believe in, if you can name it, or as Parker Palmer says, right, name, claim, and aim it, right? Then you can use it to help you in moments where you're not sure what to do. You can go back to those values and say, okay, I believe in this, and that's going to, if I have option A and option B, clearly I have to do option B. So that's how it becomes kind of part of your living practice. But it does take time, and it's worth taking the time to really dig down to those ideas. They're not going to be static either, and so it's not something you can just do and say, this is what I believe and I never have to come back to this again. But it is worth laying that groundwork before you get started, because that's going to tell you what kinds of evidence you need to include, and it's going to help you decide where to put your energy as you move forward. We have lots of demands on us for service and research and all of those kinds of things, and if we can align those practices with our values, then we also have a sense that we are doing good work, and that we're contributing in a way that is most suited to what our talents and our capacities are. So it's not just a thing that you have on a piece of paper, right? It's something that you can carry with you as a guide and a tool. That would be my advice. Take time, think. Cry a little bit if you want. Nobody ever died from crying. Just hydrate, and then go back and think some more. Yeah, what would your advice be?
So I think I agree with all of that. That's exactly correct. all of the above. I think the piece of advice that I would give is to find your voice, and to find a kind of clarity of voice that sounds like you in the teaching dossier. So my first attempt at a teaching dossier, as I was on the job market as a brand new faculty member, it didn't sound like me at all. And that's not anybody's fault. We're actually not taught to use our voice very often in our scholarship, in our research. The voice, our personality, our humor, our delight, our joy is often stamped out of academic writing. So we don't have a lot of experience doing that, and we don't have a lot of people who can guide us through that process. So I would say try to find your voice. Try to, when you have your teaching dossier, give it to somebody you know intimately who doesn't know you necessarily in the context of your institution, and say, does this sound like me? Does this have a little piece of me? Does this have something about me that animates my world? And Parker Palmer, who wrote this fabulous book called The Courage to Teach, he talks about the courage to be able to stand in front of a classroom and live an undivided life, to bring into the classroom, to invite in all the components of who you are, your childhood, your background, your messy journeys, your hobbies, your research, your interests. And I think if we were to take that idea of living an undivided life, and then put that into an undivided voice. What does that voice look like? And some of the best teaching dossiers that we've read are ones that tell stories of a kind of genesis or transformation, of a messy journey, of a winding road that is not linear, and that there's joy and delight and complexity in that. So embrace the messiness of it. Embrace the contested nature of learning and growing as a teacher, as a person, as a collaborator, and just really find that voice. And if you can't, find people who can help you excavate it. And that's why I love, our 3M mentoring network. I think that's so important. That's building allies and champions and advocates across the country from very different kinds of institutions and disciplines who can help do some of that really difficult work.
Yes, and they're very friendly
Yeah.
too. So they will be very friendly when they're giving you back your dossier and say this doesn't sound like you,
Right.
which can be very frustrating. But we're very friendly. We will cheer for you as we're making you cry. No, we're not going to make you cry, but yeah.
And it's, it's something, it's okay to not know how to do this kind of work because we have not been trained to do it, and there's not been a long history of this kind of professional development. So be kind to yourself and don't feel uncomfortable with the fact that you don't know yet.
Yeah, but you will.
You will.
You'll get there.
Yeah.
And then you'll be sitting here giving a video about writing your teaching dossier. We hope so.
We do. We do. So thank you so much to Dr. Lisa Dixon, an incredibly generous and inspiring and creative and an imaginative Jaroslawski visiting scholar and collaborator and an educational leader. So thank you so much.
you.
And I think the best part is have fun and happy writing.
Happy writing.